Come on. You want to be on Zoom?
שבת אחים גם יחד, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים. שבת אחים גם יחד, הנה מה טוב. שבת אחים גם יחד, הנה מה טוב. שבת אחים גם יחד, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים. שבת אחים גם יחד, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים. שבת אחים גם יחד. Shabbat Shalom. Bruchim Habayim L'Orachim Shalanu. Welcome to our guests, the Livni family, tomorrow morning's Bat Mitzvah. We will hear from some of you in just a moment. I'm Rabbi Michael Feshbach. Our accompanist, Gilchrist Sprauve, is here with wonderful music, but a tickle in his throat or something. So while he has been recently leading the singing, tonight, less so. So before I get 15 texts asking me why am I singing, I'm going to do the best I can. Unfortunately for Zoom, I have to sing into a microphone, something I otherwise never do, except for Purim. On Purim, I'm very happy to sing loudly into a microphone, because, it's Purim. But that's why I'm doing that tonight, and I still ask you, as I will ask you tomorrow morning, if you know what we are singing, please drown me out. At least that way for the people here. it will be more pleasing to the eternal God in your voices rather than mine. We come together at a time when we need light, when we need peace. We will be talking, even though I'm scheduled to talk about the Jews of China, of course, we will be also addressing Ukraine later tonight. I want to say thank you to Rigo Bel-Lorad for being with us streaming tonight. And we welcome Shabbat with warmth and light. Candles will be lit this night by Maya Livni and Rosa Moreno Livni, her mother, in honor of the bat mitzvah tomorrow morning of Maya Livni. The Kavanah, the introductory reading on page 121, and then the bracha, the candle blessing itself, on page 120. So Maya and Rosa, if you'll please come forward as we did earlier today. And now, this time, the microphone should be on and working. And welcome, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to all those on Zoom as well. So, go ahead with the paragraph. As these candles.
As these candles give light to all who behold them, so may we, by our lives, give light to all who behold us.
As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we, in our own day, be among those who kindle light.
Okay, Vakasha, go ahead. I think they'll do it. Okay, and Maya, go ahead and start. Baruch atah Einu melech olam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner Amen. Shabbat Shalom, and thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Shabbat Shalom. Kabbalat Shabbat, the psalms and songs with which we welcome Shabbat. We turn to page 130, and we combine Psalm 95 and Psalm 96 into one musical celebration. Lechuna Ranana Ladonai on page 130 means, come let us sing joyously to Adonai. And on 131, Shiru Ladonai, Shir Hadash, sing unto God a new song. We open with the opening few lines on 130. We jump to page 131, and then in conclusion, we go back to page 130. Lechuna ranena, lechuna ranena, lechuna ranena ladonai. Lechuna ranena, lechuna ranena, lechuna ranena ladonai. Naria letzor yishenu, nekadma fanav betoda. Naria letzor yishenu, bizmirot naria lo. Lechuna ranena, lechuna ranena, lechuna ranena ladonai. Lechuna ranena, lechuna ranena, lechuna ranena ladonai. Shiru ladonai, shiru shir chadash, shiru ladonai kol haaretz. Shiru ladonai, shiru shir chadash, shiru ladonai kol haaretz. Shiru ladonai baruchu shemo, basru miyom leyom yeshuato. Shiru ladonai baruchu shemo, basru miyom leyom yeshuato. Lechuna ranena, lechuna ranena, lechuna ranena ladonai. Lechuna ranena, lechuna ranena, lechuna ranena ladonai. I felt, I sensed your support. Thank you to anyone who lent their voices. We continue on page 135, the last paragraph in Hebrew. The words mean, exalt Adonai our God, and bow toward God's holy hill, Romamu Adonai Eloheinu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehar kodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehar kodsho. And L'chadodi, pages 138 and 139, stanzas 1, 2, 5, and 9, Batim Echad, Shtaim, Chamesh, Utesha, וברגע שנגיע בחלק 9, נקום ונקראת את התחושה של שבת שתבוא, תהיו איתנו. Stanzas 1, 2, 5, and 9. L'chadodi. Yada la 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 likrat kala, yada la 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 penei Shabbat nekabela, shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad, yishmi'anu el hamiuchad, Adonai echad, u'shmo echad, l'shem u'tiferet v'litihila, yada la 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 l'chadodi, yada la 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 likrat kala, yada la 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 penei Shabbat neka, likrat Shabbat, likrat Shabbat, lechu v'nelcha, ki hi mekor haberacha, merosh mikedem nesucha, sof maaseh b'machshava techila, yada la l'chadodi, yada la la likrat kala, yada la la penei Shabbat neka, hit'orari, ki va'orech kumi uri, shir ta'aberi, kevod Adonai alayk niglai, la 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 l'chadodi, la 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 likrat kala, ya la 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 penei Na'alam aod. Nalakum. Ateret balam. Gam besimcha. Uvitzolam. Toch emunei. Am segula. Boi chala. Boi chala. Yai lai lai. La 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 chadodi. La 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 b'nei Shabbat nekabela. And we jump now to Shalom Aleichem, another sense of greeting Shabbat, sung at candles and tables, Shabbat tables around the world. Shalom Aleichem, page 142. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Seitchem L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The last paragraph on page 143 together. Waking from his sleep, Jacob said, "Truly Adonai is in this place, and I did not know it." He was awestruck and said, "How awe-inspiring is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Chatzi Kaddish, page 144. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabba, b'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'gala ba'gala uv'izman kariv v'yimeru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevorach le'olam ol me'almaya yitbarach yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudusha le'la min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata Damiran be'alma ve'meru. Amen. Maya, we're going to have you come up in a couple of moments, not quite yet, but very soon. As we continue with Baruch Hu, page 146, please rise. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Page 149 in English together. Maya, start coming up. You can wait on the side over here, 149. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars, creator of the tide of time and light. You guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Baruch ata Adonai, ha'ma'ariv, aravim. On the bottom of 151, wisdom and wonder together, passion and instruction, story and symbol. All these things your Torah gives to us, and the more we devote ourselves to it, the more it grows and gives. What could be a truer token of your abiding love than this holiest of your works and the living language that gives it form? Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchutcho Le'olam Va'ed. Please be seated. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha. V'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha beveitecha u'vilechtecha v'derech u'v'shochbecha u'v'kumecha Ukshartam leot al yadecha, v'hayu letotavot b'neinecha, uchtachtam al mezuzot beitecha, u'visharecha.
Leman tiskeru, v'asitem et kol mitzvotai, v'yitem kedoshim le'Elohechem. Ani Adonai Elohechem, asher hotzeiti etchem, Me'eretz Mitzrayim, liot lachem le'Elohim, ani Adonai Elohechem, Adonai Elohechem, emet. Page 157 on the top, together. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands, marching together. Kamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nehedar b'kodesh. Nora tehilot osef ele, nora tehilot osef ele. Malchutecha ra'u vanecha, Bokei hayam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, ze Elianu ve'amru, Adonai imloch, Adonai imloch, le'olam v'ay. V'ne'emar kifed Adonai et Yaakov, u'ka'alo me'ad chazak mimenu, Baruch ata Adonai, Gal Yisrael. There is in this world tonight thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people, children, families, the elderly, who would want nothing more than to lie down in peace and raise up to a world that is safe once again. Page 160, together. Grant, O God, that we lie down in peace, and raise us up, our guardian, to life renewed. Spread over us the shelter of your peace. Guide us with your good counsel. For your name's sake, be our help. Shield and shelter us beneath the shadow of your wings. Defend us against enemies, illness, war, famine, and sorrow. Distance us from wrongdoing. For you, God, watch over us and deliver us. For you, God, are gracious and merciful. Guard our going and our coming to life and to peace evermore. Baruch atah Adonai, hapores sukat shalom aleinu, ve'al kol amo Yisrael, ve'al Yerushalayim. V'shamru, page 162. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat לדורות הברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות הברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות הברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני, עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות הברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות הברית עולם. At this point in the service, by the way, Donald, there's a reason I'm singing. I'll tell you why later. At this point in the service, I often quote Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. I will do so again tonight because one of the things I am sharing with you later, I am Facebook friends with Susanna Heschel, Rabbi Dr. Heschel's daughter, and I am sharing with you tonight one of the things which she posted about her family and her roots. But what I quote often is the phrase that Dr. Heschel said when marching with Dr. King, "When I marched at Selma, I felt as if my feet were praying." This week, our prayers will need to take the form not just of words and thoughts, but action and connections that we make as well. Page 164 for the Amidah. We begin on 164. We continue for the several pages beyond that. As we do, we rise. We face the Ark, which is facing Red Hook, which is facing St. John. But I know to all of you people from Tel Aviv, we are actually also facing Yerushalayim. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, El Hagadol Hagibor V'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, V'Zocher Chasdei Avot V'Imahot, U'Mevi Geula Livnei V'neihem, Lema'an Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch Ata Adonai, Magen Avraham, Vezrat Sarah, Ata Gibor Leolam Adonai, Mechaye HaKol, Ata Rav Loshia, Mashiv HaRuach, U'Morid HaGashem, Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed, Mechaye HaKol Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim Verofe Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayem Emunato, Lishene Afar, Michamocha Baal Gevurot, Umido Melach, Melech Memit Umechaye, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'neman ata lachayot hakol, Baruch ata Adonai, Mechaye hakol. Ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, Kadoshim b'chol yom yahalalu chasela, Baruch ata Adonai, ha'el hakadosh. Standing or seated in Hebrew or English, we continue on the next several pages in personal prayer. Aseh lema'an shemecha, Aseh lema'an yeminecha, Aseh lema'an kedushatecha, Aseh lema'an toratecha, Lema'an yechilatzun yedidatecha, Hoshia yeminacha v'ya'anenu. Please be seated. Oseh Shalom, the bottom of page 180. Say shalom, shalom, bimromav, uya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Uya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Say shalom, shalom, bimromav, uya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Ve'aseh bimromav, ve'imru and probably just read tonight rather than sung, Gilchrist, the prayer for healing, the Mishabera, and we'll go to Zoom in a moment for anyone. How many do we have on Zoom? 21. Okay. So once again, one of those experiences when there's more people in cyberspace with us than there are here. We turn to the names that are in the middle of the service sheet. Mishabera avotenu Avraham Yitzchak veYaakov ve'imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachel veLeah hu yivarech vayirapeh et hacholim ha'ela. O God, who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, send your blessing and your healing, your comfort and your hope to all those whose names appear before us on the service sheet. And in addition to those names, or even including them if you would like, we add the following: those of our loved ones, those of our friends, those of our family who are ill and need of our attention. First from me, then from any of you in the congregation, and then from anybody who is listening on Zoom. We pray for healing for Paul Fierzig, Adela Gia, Jerry Silverman, Jeff Chase, James Tunick, and other names from here. Anyone on Zoom?
Phone on mute. Charles Stevenson.
Bert Minushkin, Chana Sukol.
Marion Mole.
Baruch Ata Adonai Rofeh Cholim. We praise you, O God, who helps us heal, who brings us comfort. Rabbi Perman, are you there?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, unmute for a minute. Rabbi Perman, are you there with us?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. You're part 3. When Rabbi Perman was in rabbinical school, and also when I, a few years later, was in rabbinical school, we had a teacher, we had a professor named Lenny Kravitz. Not that Lenny Kravitz, right? But Leonard Kravitz. He was Leonard Kravitz before the other was Lenny Kravitz. And he would say great, he would, when he had a good point he wanted to make, he'd say, here's some great Torah coming at your head. But he would say the worst thing you could say about a sermon was, that was many good sermons. Unfortunately, I am going to violate that tonight in giving you remarks in 3 distinct parts. Part 1, I am deviating from the February forum. I promised to talk about the Jews of China. That's parts 2 and 3. Part 1 is going to be about Jews and other human beings in another part of the world. Part 2, Jews of China, the Jews of Kaifeng. I will be sharing some things with you that I had originally planned, but I'm going to try to keep that more brief than I was originally planning. And part 3, we are lucky to have my colleague and friend and Chavruta partner from the Shalom Hartman Institute, but somebody I've known, well, she's known me since I was a kid, and she was a student rabbi in Washington, D.C., Rabbi Sarah Ray Perman. And she happened to be listening last week when I shared the story of the Sassoon family. Those of you who were listening might remember. I talked about Talia Sassoon, first time I heard the name Talia. And afterwards, I got a text from Rabbi Perman saying, I remember when the family, she was the student rabbi at Temple Sinai in Washington when the family came. And so she remembered it from Rabbi Lipman's point of view when that very prominent Indian-Israeli family came to our congregation in Washington. And then she said, I served as a rabbi in Shanghai. So I said, you're hired. She's speaking a little bit for this week. But first, my father of blessed memory went to the former Soviet Union, I think 60 times in his life, all since détente. He was, to those of you who are visiting, my father was one of the world's great experts in the former Soviet Union and the republics. Of all those times, he only took my mother with him once. They went to Tbilisi, they went to Georgia. I remember that trip from 1991 when they were there. But the first time my mother was in the Soviet Union, ironically, was without him. When they were living in Brussels, he was the Sovietologist in residence for NATO, and she was able to go on a trip that he wasn't on. And there she was in 1986 in Kyiv, right at the time of the Chernobyl disaster. We talk about Jews from all over the world, but for so many of us, what is playing out in the headlines, these are our roots. This, as much as Gilchrist is deeply rooted in St. John and the Sproul family and the deep roots that go deep here for Jews, if it's not Russia, if it's not Poland, it's Ukraine for the Eastern Europeans among us, and then Germany not too far away for so many others. So I share with you this night, before we turn to the Jews of Kaifeng and then Shanghai, two sets of thoughts and one set of action. Remarks on Ukraine from Susanna Heschel, the daughter of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. I imagine many of us who are horrified by Putin's assault on Ukraine today are thinking, as I am, of September 1st, 1939, and the horrors of World War II that stretched throughout Europe and North Africa. Ukraine is a map of my family. Ancestors who were Hasidic rebbes in these towns and villages, whose names I know so well. And they are the cousins I grew up with who still bore those names. Chernobyl, for one branch, the start of the tree. Berdichev, Levi Yitzhak, my grandmother's ancestor, Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev. Mezbez, where the Apter Rav, the Ohev Yisrael, lived at the end. Ruzin, where my grandfather grew up. Skver, my cousin, the rabbi today of the new Skver. Uman. Uman is the seat, is where eventually Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav went, and that's where thousands, tens of thousands go every year, pilgrimage to his grave. Bratslav, where Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav came from originally. Chortkov, my cousin, is the Chortkover Rebbe. Chotin, my cousin Rabbi Jacob Twersky, who married us. Boyan, the Boyaner Rebbe, lives today in Jerusalem. Kopsitz, my beloved uncle, and many more. I think I know more names of Ukrainian villages than names of American cities. Yet there is the other side of the history, the horrors of 1648 to the murders of World War II. Ukraine is a part of our biography for many of us, and today feels like our horrifying history is being repeated. Putin is mad like Stalin in June 1941, and his will to destruction feels like an eruption from Sheol, an underground hell exploding volcanically. That a bunch of neo-Nazis attacked a bookstore a half hour south of my home in Providence intensifies the terror. Yet it was those Hasidic ancestors who taught, as my father always said, never despair. It is a sin to despair. God is always here, always with us. Praying for peace in a time of war seems so absurd, but the world right now is absurd, and I suppose being a Jew in this world is absurd. I hope praying for peace will help us rise above the absurdity and keep alive the great Hasidic traditions nurtured in Ukraine. Our hearts are there, and may God bring us peace. For my friend, my colleague, originally from Australia, Rabbi Danny Schiff, today, as Russia launches a reprehensible war of aggression against the sovereign Ukrainian nation, Jews stand with the people of Ukraine. Nobody should underestimate how extraordinary that statement is. There are, after all, few lands more saturated with Jewish blood than Ukraine. In the 1600s, well over 100,000 Jews were massacred there in the Khmelnytsky uprising. 2 centuries ago, in 1821, anti-Jewish rioting in Odessa gave rise to the term pogrom as we now understand it. 100 years ago, numerous pogroms in the Ukraine during the first quarter of the 20th century saw more than 100,000 Jews murdered. And in the Holocaust, close to 1.5 million Ukrainian Jews were pitilessly slaughtered by the Nazis along with their Ukrainian collaborators. In Kiev alone, in just the first 2 days of the 1941 slaughter, 34,000 Jews were murdered. We remember them all. We shall not forget. But if there is hope at all in this world, it lies in the reality that history is not always destined to repeat itself. If only they could have known the Jewish victims of centuries past, they would surely have been incredulous to learn that in February 2022, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is Jewish. The Jewish state, Israel, has condemned the attack on Ukraine and expressed that it stands ready and prepared to offer humanitarian assistance to Ukrainian citizens. And perhaps most surprising of all, just last week, when they surely had other things on their mind, Ukraine's parliament passed a law criminalizing anti-Semitism. The law stipulates that anti-Semitism committed by an individual is punishable by a fine or prison sentence of up to 5 years. It's a demonstration that sometimes things really can change. For these reasons, and because we are unswervingly dedicated to justice, to democracy, and to the freedom that we have championed since we emerged from Egypt, today we stand with the people of Ukraine. I will be sharing with the congregation by email in the coming days resources that we can turn to. I have this email from earlier today from Ed Finkel from the Jewish Federation of North America, which he says has raised $16 million already to help people make Aliyah to Israel, securing the local community and its institutions, maintaining critical welfare services, assisting internally displaced people in multiple locations, launching an emergency hotline, securing temporary housing. It goes on. And so the Jewish Federations of North America, the AFIA Foundation, which Julie has contributed to already, and the Joint Distribution Committee are all active on behalf of Jews and all other human beings in Ukraine and in the refugee crisis that is being created. HIAS is already engaged in the question of bringing Ukrainian and helping with Ukrainian refugees, just as we are still talking about Afghan refugees. So that, sadly, is part one for tonight. Part two. Much more briefly than I expected, but some of you may have read when you were young a book by the author Pearl Buck called Peony. Anybody remember Peony, the book Peony? What was Peony about? It was about, you remember reading it, but it was about Jews in China. It was actually about the Jewish community of Kaifeng. Much like the other settings that I have shared with you, nobody quite knows exactly when and how the community got there. Most scholars believe that a Jewish community existed in Kaifeng since the northern Song dynasty from 960 to 1127, although there are some who date their arrival to the years 618 to 907 or earlier. Kaifeng, which was then the capital of the northern Song dynasty, was a cosmopolitan city on a branch of the Silk Road. And it is guessed that a small community of Mizrahi Jews, most likely from Persia, arrived probably by land. It's possible that Jews came there earlier fleeing from the Crusades, but that is the origin. What we do know is that the community faced no real anti-Semitism. The general population of Chinese had a very hard time distinguishing them from Muslims. There were Muslims there. Both were groups that did not eat pork, but Jews had an additional dietary tradition, which Muslims do not have, of not eating the sinew. And so they were sometimes called those who remove the sinew. And also, because Jews wore blue and Muslims wore white, they were called blue-turbaned Muslims. The synagogue in Kaifeng has gone through many instances. It reminded me of reading about the history here, but instead of fire, it was mostly destroyed by flooding of the Yellow River on a number of occasions. During the Ming dynasty, a Ming emperor conferred 8 surnames upon the Jews by which they are still identifiable today: Ai, Shi, Gao, Gan, Jin, Li, Zhang, and Zhao. Although, as it happens in the early 20th century, the entire Zhang clan converted to Islam. Leaders among these communities were called mullahs, and so they were actually called the blue-turbaned mullahs. The catastrophic flood in 1642 destroyed the synagogue. There were several Torah scrolls. They sunk in the river. People dove in repeatedly to retrieve them. They were able to thread different Torah scrolls together into one complete scroll. There are drawings of the Kaifeng synagogue which are remarkable, but I want to share with you, since I'm doing this more quickly than I planned, the really interesting manner by which this community was rediscovered by Jews in the rest of the world. It was in the 1600s when Matteo Ricci, who was a missionary, a Christian missionary in Beijing, was visited by a Jew from Kaifeng who had come to Beijing to take examinations to finish his degree for the civil service. Many, out of all proportion to their numbers, Jews were served in distinguished civil service professions. And his visitor, Tyne, saw some artwork. He explained that he worshiped the one God. And at first, Matteo Ricci thought that he had found a lost community of Christians. And he showed him a drawing of Mary with Jesus. And Tyne pointed at it and said, "Oh, that's Rebecca with either Esau or Jacob." And so Ritchie's suspicions were raised, and he investigated, and he is the one who reported back to the rest of the world the existence of this Jewish community in Kaifeng. In the 1600s, they were physically distinguishable from their neighbors. By the 1800s, that was gone. There had been so much intermarriage, assimilation. There's many more things I can tell you about this community, but I am going to skip most of them to say that they have essentially disappeared, except that with a reconnection in the 20th and 21st centuries and some encouragement, there are Jews in Kaifeng, there are Chinese in Kaifeng who had lost all sense of connection with the Jewish world, who are returning to Jewish roots. There are documentaries about this group. There is now a minyan in Kaifeng, and there are today, I think the numbers I will share with you, I have at the very end, and then we will go to Rabbi Perman for Shanghai. In October of 2009, the first group of Kaifeng Jews arrived in Israel, moving to Israel, but there are, I think, 400 Jews remaining, or those with Jewish roots remaining in Kaifeng, of whom about 40 or 50 still have some vestige of practices. The not eating of pork and some other traditions were preserved. So this is a remarkably interesting story which we could go into in much more detail. That is the end of part 2. We turn now to Rabbi Sarah Ray Perman and a little bit about the Jews of Shanghai.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Can you hear me? Did you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. So I just want to add a little bit about the Jews of Kaifeng. They probably were considered at one time to be the one Jewish community that had totally assimilated. And Rabbi Feshbach, I don't know if you remember this, but at Temple Sinai in DC, Rabbi Lipman's older son, I think he was the older son, was a Chinese scholar. And we had a Chinese Purim with banners of Esther and Mordechai on long strips alongside the ark, and a gong to silence people after we had said Haman and everybody was booing. That the educator at the time, Marlene Solomon, had made fortune Hamantaschen cookies with little flags on toothpicks stuck in the Hamantaschen. So our connection to China is a long one. So in 2019, I received an email asking if anybody, or actually it was on Facebook, asking if anybody was interested in serving in China for the high holidays. And since I was retired, I offered, and our colleague, Rabbi Art Nemitov, gave me their name, and gave them my name, I should say. I had a chance to meet somebody from the congregation when I was in Israel for Hartman, and off I went, actually with my son in tow, which was probably one of the best things I did, because he had studied some Chinese in school, so his pronunciation was much better than mine, and I really don't know any, to be honest with you. He knew some, which helped, and it gave him an amazing experience. I went for almost a month. The Shanghai community is an interesting one, and I don't know if you had planned this originally, but it really was because of the Indian Jewish community, specifically the Sassoon family, that there were Jews in Shanghai. Shanghai itself had started off really as a fishing village, very backward, nothing there. And the Sassoon family went to China, and they, along with another family from India as well, named Kaduri, decided that this would be a good place to do some trading. And one of the family members of the Sassoon family, a man by the name of Victor Sassoon, realized that if you're going to have cruise ships coming, you need hotels as well. And so he was really responsible in many ways for the building of Shanghai, which went from a little sleepy village to more than 27 million people. It's 3 times the size of the city of New York. The Jewish community, before I get to the current Jewish community, but the history of the Jewish community in China is, especially in Shanghai, is not such a good one all the time. They were in part responsible for the Opium Wars because they imported opium from India and then sold it to the Chinese. And when the emperor realized that his people were a little spaced out, to say the least, he realized that they needed to do something else. They traded goods in terms of silk and tea. And Victor Sassoon, who I mentioned, eventually realized that this would be a good tourist opportunity. And so he helped to develop the cruise ships that would stop in Shanghai. A hotel that he built is still there, although it has a different name now. And little by little, Jews started coming into China, primarily from India and Europe, where we see an amazing story tied to the Jews of Shanghai is that it became a city of refuge during the Holocaust. The Japanese had taken over China, but there was a rabbi who convinced the Chinese that they would eventually go after not just the Chinese, but convince the Japanese who were controlling Shanghai that first the Nazis were going after the Jews, and the Japanese, even though they were allied with the Germans, they would be next to go. And so they lived in an isolated or controlled area, really a ghetto. And they found refuge there, even though life was very, very tough. Still, it was a safe harbor for them. And what was fascinating to me, and I wish I had known this when I knew this person, my Hebrew professor at Johns Hopkins University was named Samuel Avery, and he had spent World War II in Shanghai with his wife, working with refugees, and has written a book about his experiences there. Was called To Wear the Dust of, I'm not sure I have the title with me, and I'm not sure I'm going to go and get it now. But his name is Samuel Avery, and he tells the story of what it was like during the war years in Shanghai. Another book, if I can recommend it to you, wonderful book, is called The Last Kings of Shanghai, which is about the Sassoon and Kaduri families, what they went through as well, even though they were extremely well connected within Shanghai. It's still, life was not easy for them during the war, and how they really built the Jewish community, and actually not just the Jewish community, but Shanghai in general. Today, there is a Reform congregation there called Kehilat Shanghai. When I went, there was a young woman who was their coordinator from originally from Cleveland. She's now in rabbinical school in Jerusalem. With the pandemic, because this happened the pandemic happened right after I'd been in China, I'm not sure where they're at. I think they have a new coordinator now. But to be part of any of the Jewish community, because Judaism is not recognized in China as one of the official religions, you have to be either an expatriate or related to one. So one of the families that we stayed with, or they helped put us up, I should say, there's a little hotel in their little community in Shanghai. And the husband works for the State Department. But the wife was originally Chinese. And actually it's fascinating because she speaks Hebrew as well, because he was stationed in Israel for a while. So you have to be either expatriate or related to one, married to one, a child of one, whatever. The community is 1/3 Israeli, 1/3 US, and the rest are European. And in fact, our other host family in Shanghai was from France originally. They have no building, no sanctuary. They keep their stuff. They had a WeWorks where they kept their storage area and had religious school. They could do services there, but because I was there for the high holidays and for the B'nai Mitzvah of 5 young people, services were held at one of the synagogues that had been in a part of the Jewish community in World War II, and actually it was started prior to World War II. And this is now a museum. It's called Ohel Moshe. They have this long wall, and in fact, my Hebrew teacher's name is on that wall, as one of the people who survived in Shanghai during the war. The synagogue is usable, not very big, I have to admit. That's where we had most of our high holiday services, as well as the B'nai Mitzvah of these 5 young people. Otherwise, we had services in a hotel in Shanghai for Yom Kippur. And the hotel was very accommodating, and I love it. They have a little sign in Hebrew that shows where the stairs are, so you don't have to use the elevator on Shabbat or on a holiday. And the hotel was very accommodating to us. There are also 3 Chabad congregations in Shanghai. Not surprising, I guess. And part of the reason that there are 3 of them is that it is such a large community. Like I said, it's 27 million people. So it's a very spread out city. And there's a river that passes through. And so some are on one side of the river, some are on the other side of the river. That's why they have 3 Chabad. But they were very helpful to us because we needed a lulav and etrog. Where are you going to get those in Shanghai, right? And they provided us with one for Sukkot, which was very nice of them. There is another older synagogue too called Ohel Rachel, and it is not used, although it is a museum, that you need permission from the government actually to have services at either one of them. I did not get to see Ohel Rachel, but I did get to see Ohel Moshe. And Ohel Rachel is named for one of the wives of the Sassoon family. China is very proud of their role in saving Jews. So they really, this museum synagogue of Ohel Moshe, they show it off. And in fact, during services, I was warned, don't be surprised if there are tourists walking through, and there were. The area became known as Little Vienna, where this synagogue was, and still is. There were 14,000 visas from the Chinese Council in Vienna that were given to Jews, so they had a safe place in Shanghai. I'm trying to think. Oh, and it's also one of the other people who lived in this little area was Michael Blumenthal, who had been treasurer of the US Treasury Department. With the Civil War that took place in 1946, where the communists came in, most of the Jews left. Like I said, today, Judaism is not considered a legitimate religion. You can do Jewish things, but as I said, you have to be expatriates or married to one. We did have tashlich, but we had to be very careful doing it so that we weren't seen as doing some kind of religion. Of course, my phone's going to ring during this. Yay. They also have a Moshe house in China. And I spent some time with the young people who live there. And if you're not familiar with it, I'm guessing you don't have one in St. Thomas, but we do have one here in Pittsburgh. And it's a place for young people to live and to do Jewish things and to try and encourage other young people to be involved. There's not a lot else to tell you. I just have to say it was an amazing experience. I would love to go back. I also had the chance to go to the Reform community in Beijing called Kehillat Beijing, and spend Shabbat Shuvah with those people. Again, where their synagogue is in Beijing, the building that they use for services, we couldn't go to because it happened that we were there during their national holiday. It was celebrating the 70 years of the founding of the People's Republic. So we actually were in a school building that was used by some other people and members of the congregation that train or help young people who want to come and study in the US. And I have to say the founder of Kehillat Beijing, because we stayed in her home near the Great Wall, amazing woman. She is a permanent resident of China. This is extremely unusual to have a non-Chinese person become a permanent resident, but she was responsible really for them developing a lot of their medical community. And just like I said, absolutely amazing. And they do some fascinating things. I just was in touch with, and I hope to have it for Passover. There's a young man who's created a Beijing Haggadah. They have had like a Yom Limud where they've studied with Jews all over Asia. The connections are just phenomenal. They had a young man in from Bali, the Shanghai community, to do music because they send their kids to camp in Baltimore, or the Baltimore area, I should say, Camp Louise. It's really fascinating to discover Jews everywhere. And I felt very welcome and very comfortable in the community. And like I said, God willing, at some point I'll be able to go back and see other things in China and maybe get to Kaifeng, although I had heard it was a closed community at this point, in part because there were Jews from Kaifeng who had tried to make Aliyah. And when that got out into the press, the Chinese government decided they wanted to really close it down. And so they are not, it's not easy for those Jews that are still there. Any questions, Michael?
Many, but we probably should move on. And
Yes.
I am delighted to hear your voice. I saw you actually on the streaming computer, so that was wonderful. And thank you, Rabbi Perman. I have follow-up, but we will do it another time. And thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for including me.
The only sentence I will add is there is some lobbying efforts going on to get the Jewish community recognized, so there doesn't have to be this hidden element. I'm going to skip most of the announcements except to say we have a remarkably interesting speaker next week. Most of you are not on island through next week, so I will skip that and send it out by email. And please, to those of you who are on Zoom who are on island or by Zoom, please join us tomorrow morning at 10:30 for the Shabbat morning service, at which we will have also the bat mitzvah of Maya Livni. And thank you to all of you for being here with us, to coming to the island, to being here. I'm really grateful. I'm looking forward to tomorrow morning very much, and thank you all. I am going to ask. If you are okay, Donald and Julie, if you will open the ark doors for Aleinu. We're going to skip Shehonot Shemayim, so we're going to do an abbreviated version of Aleinu. But we continue. Aleinu is on the bottom of page 586. And as we continue with Aleinu, in a moment when the ark doors are open, we ask that you please rise. Okay, Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שהוא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As we close the ark doors and jump right to V'ne'emar V'haya Adonai Lemelech al kol haaretz Bayom hahu Yeh Adonai echad Ushemo echad. Please be seated for a moment. There are stars whose radiance is visible on this earth, though they have long since ceased to exist. There are people whose light and whose warmth continue to shine for us, though they are no longer among us. These stars which shine in the dark of the night, they light the way for humankind. We remember at this time those of our congregations, beloved, whose yahrzeit occurs on this Shabbat: Matthew Agurkis, Ben E. Bain, Alex Berlin, Zira Golda Dries, Max David Falick, Benjamin Goldberger, Saul Goldman, Erno Havas, Sylvia Luciano, Albert A. Lustig, Michael Lustig, Sheldon Minion, Diane Weil Monk, Raymond Newman III, Frank Niedergang, Charlotte Paiwanski, Ethel Heller Paiwanski, Beatrice F. Rudnick, Arthur Sandhouse, Martin Sternberg, Idalie Adele Stewart, Rizal Jacobs Tepperman, Esther Wechter. We observe yahrzeit for the following Chai members and those dear to our Chai members: Ziska Enduz, Jeanette Berger, Harry Black, Philip Boedinger, Abe Brudner, Lawrence Coyne, Bruce Davidson, Seymour Dalby, Selma Fine, Dorothy Fierzig, Ethel Goldfarb, Leatrice Goodman, Dr. George Gottlieb, Julius Greenberg, Murray Greenstone, Ruth Hinden, Sama Holland, Jenny Kessler, Max Klein, Harry Cranston, Tilly Kravitz, Evelyn Levin, Art Levoff, Gussie Lewin, Diane Lichterman, Benjamin Lichtman, Sarah Lichtman, Muriel Lubin, Bernard Maletsky, Renee Messing, Bernard Miller, John Mitchell, Edith Nam, Miriam Novick, David Perkin, Francis Randall, Martin Resnikoff, Stephen Robbins, William Romanoff, Lynn Rosemore, Sally Rosenberg, Sandra Rotenberg, Rose Rudberg, Nathan Schatz, Ellen Schindler, Leon Schwartz, Helen Schulman, Benjamin Schwadron, Martin Silver, Libby Sunken, Roberta Teague, Sam Uris, Doris Weiss, Millie Weitzenkorn, Shirley Weiderman, Bruce Zoller. During this period of Shloshim, Douglas Johnson. With sorrowing hearts, two who were laid to rest in recent days: Samuel Rawson and Alex Hosier. Is there anyone else here to say Kaddish for someone whose name I did not mention? Yes. We certainly can, especially those 13 brave soldiers who knew what was coming. Anyone on Zoom?
Addie Otley.
Addie Otley. The memories of all of our loved ones are with us. Our griefs and sympathies are mingled as we turn now to Kaddish Yatom, page 598, and as is the custom in most Reform synagogues, we rise as a congregation as a whole for Kaddish Yatom itself, page 598. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabba, be'alma divra chirutei v'amlich malchutei, b'chaye chon uvyom echon u'v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabba m'varach le'olam olmei almaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekudasha b'richu le'ela min kol birachata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlam rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn in all communities, in all places, losses from COVID, losses from conflict, and and conflagration and war, losses of all kinds. All of us who are suffering the pain of loss everywhere, may we find comfort, may we be comforters, and together let us say, Amen. I thought we would close our series on Jews from other places, or all over the world, with a taste of our own roots, or a little bit of Ladino. Now, this may not have been sung here in the history of our synagogue, but other Ladino settings were. But we turn to Ein Kelohenu, but the Ladino setting on page 631. Following that, I believe we do have a Kiddush set up outside. And next week, March 4th, we are returning to an Oneg in the outside section of Lilienfeld House. Finally. Page 631, Ein Kelohenu, non como nuestro Dios, and my Spanish pronunciation is not great, so please sing loudly. Ein Kelohenu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkenu, Ein Kemoshienu, non como nuestro Dios, non como nuestro Señor, non como nuestro Rey, non como nuestro Salvador. Mi Eloheinu, mi Chadonenu, mi Malkeinu, mi Moshienu, quien como nuestro Dios, quien como nuestro Señor, quien como nuestro Rey, quien como nuestro Salvador. No del Eloheinu, no del Adonenu, no del Malkeinu, no del Moshienu, loremos a nuestro Dios, loremos a nuestro Señor, loremos a nuestro Rey, loremos a nuestro Salvador. Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, bendicho nuestro Dios, bendicho nuestro Señor, bendicho nuestro Rey, bendicho nuestro Salvador. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, tú sos nuestro Dios, tú sos nuestro Señor, tú sos nuestro Rey, tú sos nuestro Salvador. Shabbat Shalom. May it be somehow this week a week of peace. Shabbat Shalom. We break bread. We go when we are off.